How similar was life working on Entourage to the party scenes, Doug? Like in your life or when you got to LA or the other guys? Was there any similarity?
I mean, everything I did on Entourage was an attempt to be, I want to say, as realistic as possible, because it was. Obviously, we put better looking people in the backgrounds, okay? So sometimes you look at a restaurant.
That's the truest statement I've ever heard in my life.
But sometimes you look at Entourage and you look at a restaurant and you go, holy shit, it's the best looking group of people I've ever seen in a restaurant. But everything that was happening was essentially really realistic, just a little heightened, a little more colorful, a little more wish fulfillment and all of that, But, and it's not that, by the way, everyone who knows who worked on the show and everyone who knows me, I was never the partier guy. I was never an Entourage guy. But I would go out, and I'm an observer, and I would see all of this stuff. And, so we made a deliberate attempt to be as realistic as possible,
So it's art imitating life, yeah?
By the way, it really, all of it is art imitating life, and everything that happened on Entourage, there would be so many similar things happening behind the camera, and with Victory the podcast, it almost feels like the same thing is happening all over again. It's kind of surreal,
I feel like for you to write those scenes, yes, you're an observer, but then a part of you needs to there's a part of that in you as well. Maybe you've got some inner exhibitionist or some inner party animal just waiting to come out, basically.
Listen, it's definitely all in me. And again, now because of the podcast, I'm watching the show back, which I haven't in years. And there's so many elements of my personality and my life in each of the characters that it's almost creepy when I watch it now, And my Ari and his wife were based on me and my ex-wife. My son played Ari's wife, and there were stories that were right from our lives, which, my ex-wife used to yell at me, "You're not putting that on TV," I'm like, well.
I mean, Ari is one of my favorite characters of all time. That scene where he goes in with the super soaker when he's just shutting it down, and he's just leaving. It's just it's amazing. And then his wife just comes in and he has to fall in line like a little pet dog. Basically, Jeremy Piven in that series, he was fucking amazing, to be honest.
He's on a stand-up tour right now. He's doing stand-up comedy, and actually he'll be on our podcast tomorrow. But Jeremy there was no one on earth that could have been better for that role, and it was really it was pretty wild, because when I wrote the first outline of the show, I wrote Jeremy Piven into my outline to play my agent at the time, who was a very different guy.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and Jeff Jacobs, I don't know if you know him at all, at CAA. It's completely different than Ari. Yeah. But I wanted Piven because I loved him from the Larry Sanders Show and some other stuff. And then I had never met the real Ari. There's a real Ari. I don't know if you guys know, but
I've never met the real. Is that what real Ari's like? That, yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, real Ari would be like, I'm 10,000 times funnier than him, better than him, and blah blah blah. But I met the real Ari at the pitch at HBO. He represented Mark Wahlberg. I'd never heard of him. I'd never met him. And I'm walking in with this idea, and I'm like, Jeremy Piven, I want to play this agent and whatever. And then I met Ari Emanuel, and I was like, oh my God, this is like the greatest character in history. And Piven, who was a little different in Larry Sanders, he was a little chubbier, a little less together, had really transformed his body and was kind of like an Ari type now. So it just really kind of worked together. And the first time I got Piven on set, I was like, we're gonna do well with this,
When you think of Hollywood, that's what you think of, is like the Ari character. You think of agents storming around, smashing up, when you hear stories of Death Row Records back in the day, I want my fucking royalties, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Do you have characters like that today? I feel like it's hard to be as big a personality nowadays with that, because you just get shunned from the industry, basically, if you're too large like that, basically.
I mean, the world is a different place, and if you, again, it's like that fine line of the PC bullshit we're all dealing with now. But a guy like Ari, on the show, Ari was, at the end of the day, he was a good guy with a big mouth. But you can't have a...
He had a heart. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. You can't have a mouth like that in 2021, though. I mean, you can, if you're Governor Andrew Cuomo, and then it comes out and they'll destroy your life. But you can't talk you can't talk like that anymore, So, Now, people are going to do it, and they're going to get filmed, and they're going to get outed, and they're going to get fired. But
And then you get cancelled. Yeah.
Yeah, but they really are. But back in the day, 20 years ago, I mean, I worked in a mailroom. I saw people, that was not exaggerated. I mean, again, Ari was the nicer version of the agents I saw in the business when I was coming up. Now, the difference now also is the agent's power is so much less. I mean, like, you guys...
They were the gatekeepers. Yeah, now you got the internet, basically.
Exactly. I mean, look at us. We both have our own radio shows, and nobody hired us. Nobody has to pay for it. We do it ourselves, and you could do that with music, as you know. You could do that with film. So they're becoming less and less relevant. But also, I mean, again, nobody should speak that way, I guess. But you can't speak that way. That's that's going to be the end of your career if you talk that way.
Yeah. And is it true that you put every word in Piven's mouth as a character, right? So the funny scenes, they're coming from your head. Is that right?
For a large portion of it, yeah, sadly. But so much of the stuff, like I said when I was watching it yesterday, so much of it is like, oh my God, that was like me and my ex-wife there, and that was, I put little bits of myself in each of the characters, which I'm not even sure I realized at the time, Right. So it's weird looking at it back now as a 50-year-old, which is a little past that now. But I tried to put, and I think writers, write what unless you become like Shakespeare and you can write whatever you want. But I've kind of always written kind of my life in certain versions and mixed it and matched it with other things that are happening. And the inspiration for Entourage was obviously Mark Wahlberg's life. But I infused the idea of a movie star's career with much more aspects of my life,
Gotcha. Was it remarkable to you that how big Entourage became and how many seasons it ran, then a movie? Like, did you ever see that come in and then to then sustain a weekly podcast after it? Or did you get in there and think, this is going to be big?
I mean, that's iconic now, basically. It's iconic.
For sure.
Yeah, it's part of culture when you talk about Entourage.
I'm the most negative, neurotic Jew on the planet. I don't, it took 2 years of hell to get that show shot. And, at the time...
What was difficult about it?
Well, HBO, Chris Albrecht was the president of the HBO, who was the best. And he definitely believed in the show early on, but I don't think a lot of other people at HBO did. I think they thought this was going to be like their young adult thing that, like maybe a couple of people would watch. So they were very, very hard on notes and letting it go. I had never run a television show before, so it was just not easy going. And if you asked me after we shot the pilot, I would have been thrilled if we got a season out of it. I mean, I never expected anything to come. And, I had just, before that, I had done an independent movie that Universal, for like $1.5 million that Universal Studios picked up. I was like the hot director for about 45 seconds in LA, getting all these offers, and I was turning down. I'm like, nah, I'm not going to do that yet. And then the movie came out, and it was $1.5 million movie that was released on 2,200 screens, like it was a $50 million movie. And again, I thought it did okay because it made more money than it cost in the opening weekend, but they didn't think it did okay, and I was unemployable. I could not get a job.
That's insane.
As anything. I mean, so I went from like legitimately, you want to go do the Heartbreak Kid,
Wow, yeah.
You can't get anywhere. So when the show was happening, I was just, sort of happy to be getting some type of paycheck and was hoping it would continue. And,
right.
I kind of acted like that for the whole 8 seasons and the movie. I never felt confident or this and that. I just felt keep your head down and keep rolling as much as you can, so...
Did you, I think the second part of that, in terms of the way that Entourage has impacted culture, like you're able to sustain long enough that you're still doing a podcast series based around the chemistry and some of the topics that came up, and especially it's thematic. It's thematic for my years growing up. Like it's part of me. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Where I'm talking about Ari, sometimes I think, what would Ari do? And you fantasize about it, like, and obviously you have to take a couple rungs down the ladder of charisma.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? So you're not hurting no one's feelings. But like, did you start to get a taste for? Do you know what this is actually like? Dope.
I mean, you know what? There was so many cool moments, and sitting at a restaurant here overhearing people talk about the show. Newspapers all over the world referencing it, ESPN saying lines from the show. So obviously I felt all of that. But, as I said, like yesterday I watched the season 2 finale. I haven't seen it in years. And I got the same feeling that I got back then, because I always used to be like, well, that's it. That's the end of the show. So at the end of season 2, I was like, we're not going to be able to top that. Like, it felt like the end of a series. And every year I used to feel like that. What's next? How much more can you do? So I never really sat back and said, wow. And even, to me, the most interesting thing with the Me Too movement and, the PC culture that's kind of hit us, that really hit the Entourage movie right in the face. I mean, we came out,
for sure.
We came out at a time where, the movie tested through the roof at Warner Brothers. If you like the show, you like the movie, but the reviews turned it into, all of a sudden we were this misogynistic animals, which it was the same thing as it was before, but the world was shifting. And the last 3 years, to be honest with you, has been like this Entourage abuse. The show wasn't as good as we thought it was. Blah, the usual bullshit that happens. And again, I'm not even saying that because, with the culture, obviously we all can learn, and there are ways to be better, and there are ways to, that people can be kinder, and I'm all for that. But the funny thing about Entourage as opposed to The Sopranos or Wolf of Wall Street, they get passes by somehow viewing them as art, where Entourage, which at one point was considered the best show on TV by a lot of critics, suddenly became, it's a stupid comedy with some, half-naked people in it. So the narrative on it really changed from it being this smart, realistic look at Hollywood and friendship to some kind of misogynistic camp. So that has really, I felt really, which is great, since we started this podcast, has really turned. The show, I think, is starting to get a whole new look during the pandemic. I think people are realizing it wasn't quite as vulgar as they maybe imagined it, and it was actually pretty tame and quite realistic.
Obviously, I know the amount of work that goes into making a 3-minute song. What people hear on the surface is a 3-minute song, right? And I'm watching my 45-minute, 45-minute episode of Entourage, and I'm like, this is amazing. And I just, behind the scenes, just where do you start when you're trying to write an episode? What does that process look like from beginning to end? And, there's all sorts of questions around that. Can you try and sum that up? Because I think that's so
torture.
Magical, man.
That's the sad thing, is I actually think about musicians all the time, like I just, whether you like it or not.
We think about you, bro. We think about you.
Whether you like it or not, I love Taylor Swift, and I watched her thing on Disney Plus, I wrote this song in 4 minutes, and it just came into my head. Or like Stevie Nicks saying she wrote Landslide in 7 minutes, and it's playing 50 years later. Writing a script, for me anyway, is a torturous grind, and doesn't matter if it turns out good or bad. It was equally as difficult, and I am the type of person, which is why I try to make as few television shows as I can, to be honest with you. Once I'm immersed, it's 24/7, and I'll wake up at 4 a.m. and think about this. I'll be in the shower thinking about that, and often, which maybe is like music, I hear words like music, dialogue specifically. Yeah. Story's a whole different animal that you have to really craft and grind, but dialogue kind of comes to me usually like music does. But sometimes I'll write a whole scene in the shower, and then I come back and go to type it, and it doesn't play the way I heard it, So it's
like the famous voice note when you're going like la la ba da ba da da, and it sounds trash when you listen to it. Like,
see, if I did that la 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 la, but it would sound like trash. You sounded good, but it's that self-critical thing also, which is such a tough thing for artists, and it does why. And it's not like, again, I'm not even dismissing musicians. It just feels like every time I watch my favorite musicians, they talk about some classic song that they've knocked out in 5 minutes, and that drives me fucking crazy. Yeah. But very rarely, I mean, there are some writers. I was actually watching some doc on John Hughes. John Hughes, one of the great comic writer directors of all time. He wrote Ferris Bueller in like 7 days and never changed a word of
That's
it.
insane.
You know, that's not me, and that's not the process.
I find that
for
so
me.
surprising because Entourage is so conversational and relaxed. It's not like big monologues and stuff. It's like it's very natural. Like, do you not find the more time you spend on that, you're sapping away that natural part to it? Do you know what I mean?
It's not. It's like I said. It's not the dialogue. That's the easy part for me. Once I know the scene is about these three guys are trying to steal a car. Okay, but until I can figure out A, what the scene is about, and then B, how it relates to the rest of the story, and then again, like I said, looking at the episode yesterday, a lot of people would say, "Oh, Entourage, there's no story. There's no story." I watched a couple episodes yesterday. I'm like, there's so much story packed into 30 minutes, and people dismiss it because of what you said, because the dialogue is kind of very natural and it feels like just people hanging out, but there really is a lot of story in there, and it took a lot of time. And one of my favorite moments behind the scenes of Entourage was James Cameron.
Oh, yeah.
Like top 5 filmmakers in the history of the world, maybe even top 1. He was on the show as an actor, and he was writing Avatar in the trailer. And he came out, and I still I don't know if he was with me, but he's like, Doug, how do you do this? You write these people, they sound so just regular and natural. I'm writing like these blue figures and all of this. Now, I didn't even know what he was talking about at the time because I didn't know about Avatar, but I think that's the skill I possess, which is writing dialogue in ways that people actually talk it.
Yeah.
But the real grind, which maybe is in music also, finding the melody, I have no idea, but the story is where the torture is. And obviously, the more you go on a show like Entourage, the harder it gets. There was a line in the episode I watched yesterday, which I forgot, which someone said something about realism, and they said the only thing that's not realistic is that 4 guys our age would still hang out and live together. And that's what I always think about, because that was the most unrealistic thing about the show, that guys into their 30s would still get to be that close, because very few people do. Usually people get married, they get their girlfriends, whatever, they move out of town. So, but the dialogue I could write dialogue all day if I know what the scene is about. But that's, to me, is the easy part. The hard part is figuring out what the actual story is, how you're going to fit it into a 30-minute episode and make it move. With the show, which is similar to the podcast, I never wanted to bore anyone. I wanted it to be over before you even knew it. It was like, and people are always like, it's so short, which it wasn't short. It was the same average as any other 30-minute show. But, we had a very specific goal to make it move as quickly as possible. So, and even with dialogue, I would, when I go back through dialogue, I get rid of every excessive word that I don't need, So if I'm writing a 3-page, which is really rare back then for a half-hour show to have a monologue. Jeremy would talk about this on the podcast about he'd wake up to a 3-page monologue. Like nobody does that on television in a comedy, And, obviously, he killed it in everything he brought to it. But before it ever went to him, I'd gone through it 1,000 times obsessively, and sometimes maybe needlessly. But every comma, every pause was, in my head. So
I was gonna ask a question about how you manage a big project like that. The magnitude of the Entourage universe is like a small marvel, right? It's like how does everything relate at that point and make sure, how do you manage that? Do you have like the biggest Microsoft projects thing ever, like with unlimited tabs, or is it like a big whiteboard with sticky notes everywhere and like the detective note boards? Like,
well, I mean, Mark and I shared the same manager, who was also the producer of the show, and the three of us had done exactly 0 episodes of television when we started this. So while it was an incredible journey and worked out well, it's better for most people to have some experience before they jump into this giant thing. Yeah. And we really, and certainly, mostly me, made it up as I went along, and is not the way to do it, even though the end result I'm happy with and it worked out. But now, I'm working on a new show now. I am far more prepared and have thought long and hard about where this is going. When Entourage got picked up after that 2 years of developing the pilot, and HBO called me up and said, okay, I think it was December, and they said, okay, we'll start shooting in March, 7 more episodes, which is not a ton of episodes, but I went, 7 more episodes? What the fuck am I going to write 7 more episodes about? Like, I legitimately had no idea what the show was about after the pilot that I'd worked on it for 2 years. I'm like, okay, it's about these guys in Hollywood, but what the hell is actually going to happen every week? So I just started going and started making it up as I went along, which is never a good process, especially when you're trying to bring in lots of other people to the process. So the smartest thing to do, which, you know, my agent, who was the original inspiration for Jeremy Piven's character, when I was pitching Entourage, he gave me the Bible, which is what it's called, the whole treatment for The Wire, okay? He said, this is what you go into HBO with. This was 90 pages, written like a novel, something that if I spent the next 1,200 years of my life working on, I could never, ever, ever do. And I almost didn't go to the meeting because I was like, I can't fucking do this. Like, I don't, you know, because I am.
I'm very the fucking bar pretty high, like.
But I'm like off the cuff. I'm kind of, you know, like, let's go here, let's go there. But the more prepared you can be, it doesn't mean things won't change, which is why, like, the show I'm working on now. But I could bring in other writers this time and go, here, you know, think about this, think about that, and then get into there. But the writing process for me, like I said earlier, is the torturous part. Everything else, the production that I had such amazing people that we were lucky enough to get to work on this show, that the machine, once scripts were done, was really smooth and great. And our production was not only smooth, it was fun. It was just like a good time. What are these people going to talk about today? What are they going to do? Right. What are the stories going to be? So, is it fair to say then that there were 3 takeaways? Like, life favors the prepared, right? So, you know, for sure. And, you know, when we've, you know, Jackson and I, we talked about it, right, with your music, right, as you refine up the pyramid, right, getting to that last 5%. So refinement. Like, if you're obsessed about getting it right, you talk about taking extraneous words out of the story and making it as direct as possible. And then the third thing I heard was, you know, you really had a small team of guys that wanted to get something done. So there's uniform in numbers, right? If you've got great people that want to do something special, you hopefully multiply the opportunities of success. Would that be kind of 3 fair lessons? Yeah, I mean, I definitely think all of those are good. You know, it's kind of cliche, but you know, I did try to hire people who were better than me. The cliches for a reason. Yeah, but I try to hire people that were better than me in every department that I could find. I wanted people that were smarter than me, that were better than me, and you know, you hope that you find that. And of course, being prepared is extremely important, but in the simplest thing of the writing process for most human beings, I can't talk about the Stephen Kings of the world who can write 500 pages a week, or Aaron Sorkin who can write an episode of television in a couple of hours. Yeah. That's like, those are, you know, that's like LeBron James. There's nothing to explain. He just has something that most of us are not lucky enough to have. But rewriting for screenplays is the key. The blank page, I always tell writers, even though I often f*** this advice up myself, you get a first draft out, no matter how bad it is, because it's always going to get better. The more you work on it, the more you refine it. And it's like you say, you said with the dialogue, it is, especially for me, it's a rhythm and music, the way you know, one extra note. Like, I just often can hear it, and every little, you know, the actors on my show will tell you, every little extra added word that they would add would drive me to insanity. And we used to battle. I'm like, I don't want that f***ing and in there. And they'd be like, you're f***ing crazy. It sounds the same. I'm like, it doesn't sound the same to me. Now, by the way, 1,000 people might hear it and not know the difference. I have no idea. But I hear it how I hear it. And that's what I would work on. And that's what I would sit there with those scripts and try to make sure every single sentence didn't have extraneous words in it, and that every single story didn't have extra beats that weren't necessary in it. So,
I think that comment about the doing the first draft is so important. I think that applies to everything. Like even if it's a email that you don't want to send, just do the draft,
Yeah.
and then at
Get
least
on
you've
with
got
it.
something to work from. Because I think these topics become interesting as you exist longer within the industry. Because you almost, as the pressure mounts, like whether it's previous seasons or previous work that's done stuff or whatever it is, you need to keep yourself in the game, right? And something I notice is just you just got to do more. Like you got to write more, write more music, write more stuff, and just give less fucks.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah, well,
you've done the
I always
hours,
tell-
so it's good. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, I tell writers all the time, it's like, I don't believe in writer's block at all. I think it's the biggest bullshit. Procrastination, which I have a
Yeah.
serious problem with,
Me
too.
too.
is the issue. But I have never sat down and actually started typing that something didn't come out. And usually there's something in that, even if 50, 70% of it sucks, there's something in there. And it is a craft, and like I compare it to shooting free throws in basketball. The more you do it, the more you get better at it. Now, yeah, and for me, unfortunately, like, you know, which I'll keep bringing up, but like if I could do music, I would do it all day because I actually like it, but I can't. And writing is, you know, it's important that you do love it because it is a grind. And I never did love it. I loved everything that it got for me, which was on a set, production. Those are the things where I thrive, but the empty screen is still the torture of my existence.
The blank page.
I got a question for you, Doug. So the two independent movies you did you write them as well, or did you just produce them?
So I rewrote and directed both of those movies.
Okay.
So rewriting does not mean that I got rid of the large percentage of what the idea of it was. So like this movie, Fat Beach, for instance, which, you know, this is not like, oh, this is my baby and this was my work. Someone brought me on to do it. I put my stamp on it and then we directed it. But that was a $100,000 movie that 30 years later is still playing. I actually just saw the Stars app, just put it on the Stars app the other day. And then this other movie, Kissing a Fool, same thing. It was written actually, which was an interesting story if you guys remember this, but the original script was written by a guy named James Fry. I don't know if you remember him, but he wrote this book, A Million Little Pieces, that, you know, Oprah brought out, and then it became this whole fraudulent thing. But anyway, I took the script, I did the best I could with it, and then we made the movie. So, but not original ideas that I came up with. And then I directed both of those.
So I got a follow-up question to that, a loaded question here. So I over the years, I've written a lot of, but mainly business. But actually, a lot of people don't know I come from a creative background. So in my early days, at my peril, I wrote 3 film scripts. And the last one famously went down in ashes with Miramax. But it was an epic, and I advise everyone, don't go write 3 hours in 20 minutes of runtime, all right?
Was it the Stand or something?
No, it wasn't the fucking Stand. It was a chronology on. It was called The Blood, and it was based loosely on the romanticism of the Holy Grail. Many people have approached it. There's a famous book, The Holy Blood, Holy Grail. But that was a lot of historical references, and I struggled to find the characters and the pull through the whole story. The real question I've got is, I don't know if it's easier to compress and build stuff for TV than it is to. So if you encourage a budding writer and they say, I don't know what to do, I want to be in TV, I want to be in film. Forget genre. Do they start with TV and start serializing, or should they go after a film? And not even an epic, because I don't advise anyone to do it. Look at the Irishman.
You know, yeah, I love The Irishman.
That was slow,
I
dude.
enjoyed The Irishman as well, man.
I loved it.
I could have done with an hour. I could honestly do with 45 minutes to an hour less, even though I thought the story was great.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they could probably cut it, but I don't know. The more I watch it, it gets better to me, you know?
Yeah,
first
true.
time I saw it, I did think it was very long, but I thought Casino was very long the first time I saw it too, and now I've seen it 1,000 times. But there's no answer to that because, I mean, first of all, you got to write something that speaks to you and that you love. I love history, and I've had, like I said, from the Harriet Tubman project I worked on to several others, and again, I wasn't writing that. I love history, but it's not something I think that I would write well. I'm too lazy to do research. I love to read it, and I love to go, wow, this is great, and then try to find a writer that can do that. So that's just not me. Me, like, what I'm going to write is going to come out of my head and my own experiences for the most part. But the idea of film versus TV, especially today with the film business really feeling like it's a dying business to me, short of having a giant spectacle movie, Marvel, whatever, or possibly your giant historical epic. It just seems the better stuff is happening on TV. The idea of, I remember when Al Pacino, who has children with Beverly D'Angelo, who was on Entourage, he came to the set. This is 15 years ago. And he was talking to me, which is crazy. It's like Al Pacino, but he's talking to me about this TV stuff. This is crazy. These characters just keep going and going and going. And that's what I love about it, because you can do, God forbid, a bad episode of television and then come right back strong the next week. Whereas the movie, you work for a year, come out for the weekend, which is why, like the Entourage movie. If the Entourage movie came out on HBO Max instead of worldwide in the theaters, it would have been enormously successful. But it had that one weekend to get however many people could come in, to get these critics to give it a good review. And then you're like, oh my God, I just wasted a year of my life and people just dismissed it and it's gone. So I personally like the TV business better. And, when Entourage started, which 2001 when I pitched it, I was like, this show needs to feel like a movie. We need to film it as big as a movie, which at the time, we didn't have giant TVs at home. But I'd say 5 years from now, 10 years from now, everyone's going to have these theaters in their house. So, and you see it with what's coming on the streaming now. This is probably the best time in television history for amount of quality shows that are on,
It's fair to say, though, don't you think, that with film, the fabric of cinema lives in terms of stretching genre, lives in the independent world, right? And if we were to lose that medium, we would lose some of the very best stories that actually can't be serialized, right? There's two completely different art. Would you agree?
Yeah, but I don't think we're going to lose it, but I just don't know if it's going to be, I don't know if it's going to be the theater experience. But Netflix makes The Irishman for $120 million and doesn't care that it didn't make any money. I mean, the amount of money that they are putting into this stuff is so nuts. But I don't know, I don't know that any studio would have spent that much money on it 10 years ago to release it in theaters. So I think the only problem that I see is that the streamers now for the TV have sort of turned it into the film business now, where TV used to be about the writer. That was the key. If you had a great writer, now you got to have a movie star, just like you used to have in a film.
I don't know, though, because there's a series that's blown up over here. There's always like a talking point, right? And like the new one is Behind Her Eyes, which doesn't really have you not heard? So it's this one that's booted off over here. The only notable person in it is Bono's daughter is one of the lead. And it's like, it's this weird little story about a love triangle with like a supernatural element to it. And it's a mystery ultimately, but it's like, it's massive over here. Everyone's talking about it. And it hasn't got anyone big in it.
There's always going to be exceptions, obviously.
Yeah, I feel like Idris Elba is like the rollout for a lot of stuff. Like, he gets plied into a lot of stuff. And then it doesn't... I don't know if it pulls the same way. Like, I feel like people buy into the story nowadays more so. And then who's talking about it. Like, hearsay means something a lot more than it...
Yeah.
Even more so.
The buyers don't, though. The buyers don't. I mean... sure.
I agree with
that. If you can get through the system, which, Entourage, we were lucky enough with no stars, name stars per se, which was very important to me. But now everything I do now, they're like, okay, can we attach this person? Can we attach that person? Which, it's frustrating because as a writer, like what I loved about Entourage is that, and they all had good careers beforehand, but they weren't known names. But first season of Entourage, there were people who legitimately thought it was a documentary. They were like, "Is this a real movie star and his friends or what?"
It has that feel,
yeah, and that's what we wanted, And we had, my two favorite directors on the show were both Brits, and they really brought that to it. And Mark Mylod, who does lots of Succession, brought that vibe to it. That was really important to it. So.
Hey, Doug, you talk about coming over to London. You know you can actually come over to London now, right?
I know. Well, I'm supposed to be doing some show, but we'll see. I'm just waiting. So as soon as they tell me they're ready to actually write, as soon as they're ready to write checks, I'll come over there, you know?
I find that interesting when Martin was talking about independent cinema still being important. And you'd almost class some of these like shows without big names. They're like independent concepts where people are passionate about a storyline. They pull it together. They deliver it. Obviously, it's not totally independent. It might just be made by a smaller production house, etc., right?
Yeah.
And you forgive me for my layman terms. I know all about this, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's just shit I would want to ask someone who's in the game, right? So is that then where the big studios go, okay, TV's the big thing. Now we need to do our big studio thing in it, and get the biggest actors and all that. Isn't that then? That's when the art form starts getting a bit basically.
Listen, I'm not stupid. The business is called the business because it's a business, and if you want to be an artist, paint, and be Billie Eilish, make a fucking record on your bed with your brother, and and win 6 Grammys, But when you want to make a show that costs $50 to $100 million minimum, for a season, or 40, whatever, you gotta understand there are people who are thinking about how is it going to make money. So it's not like I don't get it, but it's still a tough process because you are at odds with certain people. But at the same time, look, I don't want to make anything that loses money for people. That's not something that I'm interested in doing. So it is what it is.
Let me, Jax, just to clue you in here, there is actually an underlying methodology that the studios use, and no one likes it, but it's just the way it is. And it's back to what I say to you all the time: if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And so there's a few things they do. One, right, they look for the story, right? It's pretty obvious. It's got to stack up. It's got to be relevant or resonant and whatever. Then they look for bankability, which is why they always attach people that have already got an envelope. People recognize them. And then the last thing they always look for is audience segmentation. If they don't understand the audience, they don't buy. And that's the commercial reality that we live in. And so every now and again, something strays from that. Now, the good thing about streaming is they're taking more risk and they're buying cheaper product from the Nordics, the Scandies, and all of that. And there's some great
the barrier
product.
to entry is lower because, as you just said, it's not relying on the launch of the weekend launch, right?
They don't. It's like vertical entertainment all over again.
I'm going to stand up for a second. I got some basketball injuries. I'm like sitting here cramping. So
you go. Hell, hold up! He's walking away from the camera. That's pretty cool, dude. Do us some lap. No one's ever done this shit before.
Cool,
you don't care about this.
There's me smoking a cigar. Who gives a? We can still.
Sitting here like a cramp.
Dude,
I'm gonna walk.
I like your
can
room
hear
though.
you.
It's very symmetrical. You've got those 2 Entourage posters on each side of the curtains.
No, this is
one
when the Garden Was Eden, which was a documentary I did that I lost 6 Emmys for Entourage, but I won 1 for that documentary. So
Shit! Hold on. Leave that on the camera. That looked fucking sick. Put that. Oh my god.
Hey,
dude, that looks.
Do you know what that looks
epic.
like? That looks like an NBA.
Yeah,
trophy.
dude. Have you got a ring for that as well?
That's an Emmy. So I can still hear you. I'm gonna be right here.
My awards are shit. My awards, man. I got like number 1 awards and all that kind of stuff, but they don't give awards like that in music. I've got a Grammy nomination, and it's a rusting Tiffany medal piece of shit.
I gotta tell you what's really funny is Doug was walking around the room. Now he's left the room. All we need to do
it's because his award is bigger than ours. Fucking bullshit.
Dude, I just realised that you sit with your little podcast there in your movie room. Does that get much airtime?
Won't get much airtime.
Your movie room.
Do I sit here and watch movies? Yeah. This is where I write now. This is where I spend a large portion of my life in this room. The
reason I say that is in my places, I've got a bunch of like theatre rooms or whatever, and I've got to be really honest, right? Other than the kids playing Xbox in them on big screens, like occasional screenings, and they are occasional. I never use them.
I got the theater projector, so I can get first run movies. The day they come out in the theaters, which when I got it 4 years ago was like the coolest thing in the world. Obviously, the world's different now, but even when the world was normal, I probably got 5 movies in a year. I feel
like you read a lot. Do you read a lot? Do you have to read a lot to do what you do? No?
You should.
I listen to a load of music. Like
I listen to a lot of music. I don't read like I should. listen, I don't write like I should. As we were talking about earlier, and I tell people this when they're young, and when I was young, I did it more. But if you're going to be a writer, you got to do it every day. I certainly don't. I certainly should. But, I'm 53 now. I just don't have that kind of fire that I had when I was 25, But,
you were saying earlier about, where it's like a little nugget where you talked about film kind of dying a little bit, basically where TV's taking over.
Yeah.
And, do you reckon that's caused by, obviously, the status quo with streaming, and obviously that's going to be accelerated by the pandemic. But is that consumer demand, or is there going to be a place for film in the future? Where do you see that going
it's hard
for
for
the
me
consumer? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's hard for me to answer because I always look. When I was a kid, I loved going to the movies. The experience.
So
of being
the experience
in a movie
is
theater,
crazy. Yeah.
But I don't know whether kids care about that. The attention span is so low. I mean, I used to go crazy 10 years ago and people would watch my shit and be on their phones. Now you walk into a movie theater, it's like everybody's on their phone, everybody's on this. So it's hard for me to say. And as the TV keeps getting better, as your in-home experience keeps getting better, I'm not sure, because it's like I loved going to theaters for a comedy. I love the group laughter, all of that stuff. But now I feel that, a lot of people think the only reason to go to a movie theater is for some giant special effects laden thing. But, and I know me, I go to the movie theaters, forgetting the pandemic, less than 5 times a year now, when I used to go 50 times a year. So it's hard for me to say what the young people are going to do. I know that I now personally, I like to watch a movie at home, and it looks so good and it sounds so good that, I don't really want to go into the theater and have people breathe on me and everything else. So.
I think what it is for me about TV is the reliability of it, right? So where life is fast now, and there's happening all the time. Do you know what I mean? And there's something about, especially, I like to watch series generally when it's finished, right? Because then you can plan it. Yeah, and you can it's packaged in.
Well, it's
you know what
packaged,
you're doing
right.
tomorrow night. Like, you know what you're doing. Or it's that time. Like, I know most success, no matter who you are, whether you're on the beginning of the ladder of success or even crazy successful people, they make time for this thing that they're watching, and pretty much in the pockets before they sleep. Like, no matter how busy I am, I make time. 15 minutes, even if I've worked a 21-hour day, I'll watch 15 minutes of that show I'm watching just because.
Well,
and I think that's what it is about TV.
Yeah, well, that's also like the good thing. Sometimes, like, you hear a good movie came out, and it's 2 hours.
I can't do that.
Some reason though, you'll watch 4 episodes of a half-hour show, which is 2 hours, but it's just the little pieces of it all play into the same I think, which is that attention span, And I love, that's why Entourage was a half-hour dramedy. I love the half-hour form. I love those shows like Fleabag, where you could watch all of them in a day and you can't stop watching it. So that's my favorite thing. It always, no matter what, there's a bunch of good movies out right now, but for some reason I keep turning on television shows instead of watching these movies because it feels like more of a commitment for whatever reason.
It is. What movies you watching?
I haven't watched anything, but I know there's this Frances McDormand one. I don't even know the name, that I've been wanting to watch day after day after day, and then I'm like, I got to finish Cobra Kai season 3. I got to watch. So Love Island. I watched that during the pandemic. Did you guys ever watch this show?
Which one? Love Island.
Love Island UK.
Of course, dude. That was a
Yeah.
pandemic in itself. It's like the new one is Married
It
at
created
First
a
Sight.
pandemic.
Married at First Sight is the new crack, basically. Like, it's.
Wait, was it Married?
So
Love
have you
is Blind. My friend's host, Love is Blind. Did you watch that one?
I've seen that one as well. I watch
That one's
basically.
amazing.
If you're any kind of basically dedicated partner, you need to dedicate some part of your life to watching those shows with your significant other. If you're serious about your relationship, basically.
But I just love, Love Island, because I'm writing this UK show, which, like I said, writing dialogue for me is very easy. But all of a sudden I'm writing as British people, which is obviously more challenging when I'm not there. And I've been there 3 times in my life. So,
Sure.
But watching Love Island, I was like, talking to all my British friends, I'm like, is this real dialogue? Are people saying this? And I don't know if you ever saw that SNL sketch that what's her name did Fleabag. It was genius where she did a Love Island spoof. It was so funny. But
Oh, I'm gonna have to look that
check
up.
that
oh
out.
my
I mean,
god, it is hysterical. And that's the thing, because I'd be watching. I'm like calling my British friends. I'm like, do you guys all say this? Like, we got great crack, we got great banter. All of this stuff, is this real dialogue? You know?
Do you find it hard, like, translating, like, what would you say because I even think this is relevant from any perspective, translating your stuff so it connects on a worldwide level. And there's definitely different cultural elements that you have to include for it to work with an American audience, to work with an English audience. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, what would you say? And I think that applies to product as well. Like, there's different things that people look for. What is it on your mind when you're doing that?
I don't think about that, you know, and I have some British writers I'm working with, so they'll come in and tell me we would never say that, or we would never say this. But I think human stories are human stories, you know, and that's the first thing you got to find. And then you can craft the dialogue to go, okay, they wouldn't say it quite like this, but still stories are the same, you know? I mean, so, and I've always been a fan of British comedy and drama. That's stuff I've watched my whole life. John Cleese, who was also on Entourage, was, you know, and you were talking a different Holy Grail, but, you know, I actually watched, I watched Monty Python and the Holy Grail in the last couple of months, and it still holds up like perfectly. And I still say the same line. My girlfriend doesn't know what the hell I'm talking about. Like, with the Meghan Markle interview came on, I'm like, she's like, do you like her? I'm like, I didn't vote for her. And she has, which is a line from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. She has no idea what I'm talking about. But you know, I think that type of humor always, you know, Fawlty Towers was my favorite sitcom when I was growing up, even though there's only like 8 episodes of it. I watched them 1,000 times. So I love the way the Brits speaks to me. That being said, when I'm writing it, I still have to throw it through a filter, because unlike Entourage, which was New Yorkers, which I know like the back of my hand, it's a little different. So, but culturally, I don't think it's stuff. Right? I am a New Yorker, even though I've lived in Los Angeles longer than I lived in New York by a lot.
Right.
But I would never. No one would ever meet me and go, "Oh, you must be from L.A." Everybody meets me and goes, "Oh, from New York." I'm like, I haven't lived there in 30 years, but fortunately, I've maintained my my essence, I guess.
Dude, you come across as East. I know you're from New York, but you come across as East Coast, that's for sure. You know, well, the interesting thing about British comedy in particular versus what you wrote is that it's so dry, and I don't wish it on anyone, particularly from America, to try and write something that will cross over to England, right? It's very Europe's been doing it for years and hasn't succeeded. Yeah. And yet Entourage did. And yet Cheers did. There are a few things. Frasier did, right? There's only a few things that we can really count that said, you know, that stacks up to British comedy. The question I got for you is, you mentioned in the old times, so I think of Life of Brian, Monty Python, you know, Holy Grail was wonderful. And then 40 Towers, just genius, right? What are the other things that you like about British comedy, like in recent times? Did you ever watch Gervais's The Office or anything like that?
I mean, you know, like, I look at Ricky like I look at Larry David. These are guys that just like are my kind of comedy heroes, you know? And Cleese. And by the way, Fleabag, I mean, there's nothing that I've seen better in the last decade, comedy-wise, you know? Dramedy, really, obviously. So, you know, I think it's...
Yes.
Whatever it is, and hopefully with the British show I'm doing, hopefully it goes. But I don't look at it as how can I translate it. I whatever that dialogue is, I feel that vibe, and it's the stuff that I've always just kind of taken to. So I don't think it's something that you can make a conscious choice that I'm going to try to talk like these guys. But I think the universal themes are hopefully what came across. And with Entourage, you know, when we were selling that, nobody wanted Hollywood stuff. Now there's a lot of Hollywood stuff because all the stuff that came after Entourage, from TMZ to all of this internet and Instagram, made Hollywood much more accessible than it was 20 years ago. But that wasn't what the show was to me anyway. The show was about family and friendship. And, you know, it's funny you say a show like Cheers, which Cleese was also on Cheers, one of the best guest performances ever on a sitcom. But Cheers was a huge influence on me. Cheers and Frasier, and the writing on that.
Oh yeah.
Which again, I'm not trying to say I'm anywhere near that, but that's often been thoughts in my head. And whenever I'm writing a new pilot, I look at the Cheers pilot. I also look at the Frasier pilot a little bit. But the Cheers pilot is one of the best half-hour pilots to introduce characters in a short timeline, in a small space, which even though Entourage, I tried to make it a much more visual, filmic show, it's still, at the end of the day, I write a little bit like a play. And I think that's what the great thing about British comedy always was to me. It didn't require all of the bells and whistles. It was really about the dialogue and the acting, and that's the stuff that speaks to me the most, you know?
That's true. I think so on that, because
Cheers.
When I'm thinking about British TV compared to American like TV stuff, is the production value feels smaller. It's smaller budgets. It's small. It is just sometimes like just people in quite normal environments, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, you know, and again, but the thing is, and yes, I love that Entourage, we got to do all the cinematic shit that we did. But still, at the end of the day, like when I watched Fleabag, which it was on the other day, you know, the episode where she sneaks up on her boyfriend, she puts on a fucking ski mask and has a butcher knife, and he starts crying. I mean, like, it's shot in a little bathroom like this, but you have two genius actors and brilliant writing, and that's all that I ever want to watch. And even with Entourage, half the time, I close my eyes when I'm directing and I listen much more than I'm watching.
That's cool.
Like my cinematographer can make sure that the shot looks great and that the girls in the background look great and the pool looks great. But all I care about is what I'm hearing, you know? So those are the things I speak to. So.
Well, one thing I wanted to go, but we'll finish the script, the process, and talk more about the future TV and what you're doing next. But is there a process you go through? You've kind of talked about it from different angles in terms of how you approach characters and story. But is there any kind of method you use for approaching writing the script? Like, would you say, look, this is the 4 or 5 things that you organize yourself to prepare
I think,
to write?
Again, what I've learned, you know, far too late in my life is to really. Some writers especially think like, oh, if I just kind of make it up as I go, I'm not falling into all the cliches that I need. But the truth is you need those cliches. The beginning, a middle, an end, a strong story, and strong wants and desires for your characters. So now before I write anything now, I spend a lot of time thinking about what is the theme of this show, what is the main character, who is the character, and what do they want? And those things can help a lot in a script. So I think there are some imperatives that you should do before you start writing and just blasting out stuff. But everybody's going to have a different process that works for them, you know. And a lot of what I write, I find while I'm writing. I find the characters while I'm writing, and you know, it is that kind of weird thing. Like, I don't know where that came from, but it just did. You know, part of the problem, even with Entourage, I got what they call coverage from the agencies when I wrote the pilot. Some of the worst stuff you've ever seen in your life. And I've had some of those agents that wrote that stuff called me after they saw it and said I read it in a completely different tone than what it was. And, you know, those are some of the pitfalls that you have to get over. And as a writer, which I never considered myself really a writer, I kind of see myself as the guy who, whatever that term is, that's going to see it all the way through. And when I'm writing, I see it so crystal clear what I'm expecting to be on the screen. But somehow as a writer, you have to find a way to put that on the page so that someone who doesn't get inside your head can see it before you have to spend millions of dollars and produce it to get that desired effect. So,
I mean, talking about adapting, we wanted to ask you about, you know, like in the film industry where particular like award ceremonies would need to become, well, there've been comments about it needing to be more inclusive and diverse, you know, in terms of recognition, etc., etc. Do you think TV has a similar will have or has the similar problem?
Well, I mean, that's the case now, you know? I mean, it's not... I think there will always be overcorrections, and then things will get back. But I think there have been people that have been underrepresented for a long time. And as someone who feels very good about the fact that I came up with the idea, produced the show, that was there was 30 characters in this thing I did called The Brick that I had John Ridley write and Spike Lee ended up directing, but almost all of the cast was African American. And at the time, which was only 8 years ago, people were like, who's going to make a show with all African Americans in the show? So I think that that's okay, that they're overcorrecting and going, okay, now we got to do this, that, and that. But I still think there are stories that will just be white people. And there are stories that will just be black people. And there are stories that will just be Indian people. So I like to see the balance, and I'd like to see everyone fairly represented. But you don't want any type of stories altogether to disappear because someone thinks we have to do something. Like, you know, a lot of people would talk about Entourage at the time. Well, why wasn't there a black character in these four best friends? And I said, well, which was very specific to me. I said, this is the way I grew up. And I did have one good black friend in my high school. That was it. He was the only black kid in my whole high school. So I said, I'm going to have to write about the way I grew up and the way I know it, not try to put it into some box. And Hollywood at the time, I would say there were no black agents. Go walk around Creative Artists Agency. I didn't create this, but if we want to start making it look like a fake world, then we'll start going, there's all these things. Now, I do think Hollywood has made strides and that the agency does look different than it did 15 years ago, and any new show should reflect it. But I don't think things should be started as, oh, let's see how we can make this as diverse as possible. But that being said, if your show works in diversity, great. And if it doesn't, then it doesn't. But I think it's good that they're making these corrections, and hopefully at the end of the day, great stories will be great stories. You know,
I think there was a big upset recently in TV land. I think with Michaela Cole and her series. Do you know the one I'm talking about?
I don't even know who that is.
I May Destroy You. Very British. It
Very
got
British,
mad
by the way.
love. It was pretty much a black cast, and it was but it wasn't a racial TV series. Like, it wasn't based around race, and it didn't play on any overt stereotypes to do with black people, right? It was a show about a young woman growing up in a city and dealing with sex crimes, basically, like against her, like and it will be, what was interesting about it was it dealt with the minutia of sex, like men having an encounter with a dude and a dude taking the condom off without telling a girl. Right. What is that? Do you know what I'm saying? Right. And it was like a drama comedy, yeah. And it was at points a bit like weird, and it was cool. She was a dope character, and he got snubbed for a Golden Globe nomination. And the whole headline was Emily in Paris, which was otherwise quite a normal show.
Right.
Tore it up, and Michaela Cole, who was well written, well described as being the breakout star of last year, got nothing. Like, I don't know how you explain something like that, basically. Like,
I mean, listen, I didn't see it, so I can't comment.
You should check it out, is what I'm saying.
I think we all know that there's been plenty of people that have been snubbed for race, and there's been plenty of underrepresentation. So is it possible that that's why it got snubbed? Sure, but I don't know. I didn't see it, but I think there's a balance that hopefully we'll find between diversity and still making sure we can tell stories, whatever they are. I mean, the story about the Irish mob is probably not going to have that many Latinos in it, and the story about, a Latin mob probably won't have that many Irishmen in it. But I think there's a balance that we have to find. But that being said, I think it's a great thing that we're making sure that everybody's represented, and that people, like we said earlier, the gatekeepers who controlled TV and film for so many years and could make sure that mostly white people were represented. I think it's great that now people are going, how can we find a way to do this and tell great stories, though, which at the end of the day is all that interests me, and I think, but somebody's got to make sure that the old white dudes don't have all the control. And I think that's
I think it comes from what you say, like basically having more people making the product that they know. So you're going to write about what you know, and another, a Chinese writer will write about what they know, and then just that get into the masses. I'm just happy that Chinese people are not just small dicks and funny jokes. You know, they're much more wider characters now.
Yeah,
being a Chinese guy myself.
I think that the democratization of everything that's going on is going to mean that talented people are going to be represented, whether they like it or not. And the people who don't want to see that through are going to disappear. And that's what's going to happen. And the best talent is going to win. It's just that simple. And, I think the podcast is a great example of this. There's no gatekeeper stopping this now. You're going to find your audience or you're not. If people find you interesting, whether you're black, white, Chinese or not, you're going to go out there. And I think what Hollywood was for a long time was old white guys picking what they wanted to see represented and old white guys determining who they wanted to win these awards. I'm not a big fan of the awards things anyway. I think it's fucking stupid. It's not to say I don't like my Emmy that's sitting over there, but, it's not. A sporting event is what is to me. LeBron James either wins or he doesn't. Nobody's going to stop that. Nobody gets to determine that except for what happens on the court. But outside of that, you do have gatekeepers who get to vote. You do have millions and millions of dollars that people care about who wins these awards, because at the end of the day, for me, it's cool to have a trophy in my house, but the reality is, what's the purpose of that Emmy Award or that Oscar? To get more people to watch and pay for your shit. So
it also leads to another really important point, and that's that there are two things that make the world more connected, back to the best talent, the best stories. But it also sheds a light on the fact that we can't look at the delivery of the medium, but we have to look at how does it really fit. And this is why independent film won't die, just like TV may be the commodity or the rarefied thing that just gets continually produced.
Yeah.
But it's because you won't see the stories if you don't have those mediums. And the other thing is, if you want commercial reality, then diversity connects you with a global audience. And streaming has now connected people even more. So now we're watching things from all over Europe. Now we're watching a Chinese gangster movie, right? Now we're watching things that are more inclusive than we ever had. It's hard to make a case with all the cash in the industry, which started with tech dollars coming into film, and say that that's really a bad thing.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I like I said, all of it is speaks to the same thing. Democracy is gonna win, and talent is gonna rise, and all the people who thought they were in charge are gonna slowly disappear. And you can be a poor Chinese kid in the middle of nowhere and make a film for very, very little that the whole world can see instantaneously. So I believe that, Billie Eilish is a great example of it, I don't know. Obviously she's so talented, but she's 16 years old, 20 years ago. Do you think she would have won the Grammy this year, by making this album in a room? She's got to find a label. She's got to find a studio. She's got to find people who believe they know how to produce it better than her and her brother knew how to do it. So now the world just wins. She puts it out online. People love her. Justin Bieber, similar thing. And it's that's it. Now, those are obviously rarefied talents, but I think the opportunity, when I was 21 years old, made a short film. It took me a year. It took me borrowing, and stealing the money for it. I then had to hand out VHS tapes to people when walking around town like an idiot going, here, take a look at my movie. And now that I could do the same thing that I did then for a couple of $100 in 2 days and have it out on the internet in 5 seconds. So I think this is a great time for creators. I think it's a great time for natural diversity without the rules being put in place that you have to do things. I think it's just going to come. And, movies like Parasite, I don't know if that's the example but America really took to that movie in a different way than maybe they would have 20 years ago. And I think one of the things for me, who was a person who was always watching foreign films and interested in that stuff, none of my friends would. They'd be like, it's subtitled. I'm not watching that shit. Are you out of your mind? And now people are starting to get used to that. And people are watching Netflix and going, you know what? I don't even want to watch it dubbed. I want to watch it with the subtitles in the original language because it's so much more interesting. So I love that, you know?
Keep in mind that Parasite had one of the most awesome directors like in the last 20 years, right? I mean, it really, it was just a work of art.
Yeah.
And it's a story that everyone relates to. It's like class. It's the story of like climbing social ladders, like which everyone in America can relate to.
I mean, listen, the movie's genius, obviously. I just felt like a lot more people that I know that normally wouldn't go see a subtitled movie were going to see it and loving it. And I think it's because Netflix, Amazon is getting people used to this stuff. And I think that we're going to see, you know, unfortunately, possibly for Americans, that we're not the only filmmakers, that there are amazing filmmakers from all over the world. And I think we're going to find more and more of them as we go on, you know?
It's a beautiful thing.
So, like, as we near the end of this wonderful discussion, tell us what's next for you.
Yeah.
Now, you've intimated, obviously, this Thierry Henry project.
Yeah.
You're going to continue with Victory, the podcast.
I mean, I saw that and I was gassed. Like, Thierry Henry with you on a premiership.
Yeah.
I mean,
but
it's timely to do one, man.
Yeah, the thing is, you know, so it's funny. You say timely. Like, you know, Thierry's manager, Darren Dean, is my friend, and he called me to put Thierry in the movie back in the day, and he's been asking me to write some version of Entourage in Premier Football League. I don't look at any of the other shows because it doesn't matter to me. It's like, you know, Martin said earlier, he's talking about Cheers. Like, people go, okay, so it's going to be Entourage in football. So is The Office Cheers at an office? I mean, like, it's a irrelevant comment. So what interests me about Premier Football, and again, Ted Lasso, it's a very successful show.
Yeah.
The show I'm working on will not feel like Ted Lasso, though there will be a football, soccer ball, whatever you guys want to call it. I know it. We call it. There will be that.
It's not difficult.
But at the end of the day, I like it called football, and I agree. But just for Americans, I got to say soccer. But at the end of the day, what makes a show work is characters and story. And the world, while of course that helps us make it real sexy and this and that, that's almost irrelevant. It's really putting these people in that you want to see them, like I said with Fleabag, in the bathroom, in the shower. But we're going to make something, it won't feel anything like Ted Lasso to me, and I like Ted Lasso a lot, but completely different. But again, trying to do a really realistic look, which there's been 10, 15 shows that have directly kind of ripped off Entourage over the years and really gone like, it's going to be about this and that. But this hopefully, like Entourage was, and like this show, the Brick that I tried to do was loosely inspired by Mike Tyson. This is loosely inspired by Thierry's life. But at the end of the day, will be about friendship, family, and hopefully a very realistic look at what the life of an international football star is like and what the life of their family is like. So,
where are you at with it? Is it written? Have you started shooting?
So the pilot's written. Matthew Vaughn is producing it and directing the pilot. So I'm really waiting on him to say, let's go. The pandemic kind of shut us down. We've been ready for a while. But that's the plan. So hopefully soon. It's called Day Ones. And
my God, that's a proper English term as well. Me and my Day Ones, baby.
Yep. And
I love that.
And I think, again, forgetting, like, because people go, oh, there's Ted Lasso. It's nothing like Ted Lasso. I mean, it's zero to do with Ted Lasso except for the football is in it. Just like, to me, Entourage and Bowlers have almost nothing to do with each other. People can compare them. To me, they're night and day.
They night and day.
Don't even have, So, we'll see. But that's the plan, and we've been trying to cast it over Zoom. I've never even sat in a room with Matthew Vaughn. But get this rolling in the next few months.
Who are you getting to do the music? Because when you talk about Entourage, the music was lit. It was part of it.
I mean,
so how are you approaching this on Day Ones?
So, I'll approach it the same way. The way I started with Entourage music, I started writing the music that I wanted to hear in, which early seasons were a lot of my choices. Then my friend, Scott Venner, which is straight out of Entourage, he wasn't even in the fucking music
He approached
business.
me to I think when he worked on Ballers, right?
Yeah,
or something like that, and he asked me to use one of my tracks, and I remember it was early doors in my career, and I was like, oh my God, Scott Venner's awesome. He did Entourage. This is crazy.
Yeah.
And then he didn't end up
Yeah.
using it, and then I was pretty sad. But tell
What
him
an
he's
ass-
an asshole, man.
I'm gonna have to tell him he's an asshole. for
yeah.
that, but-
Outrageous.
But you know what? Like straight out of Entourage, Scott was my ex-wife's friend from college, and he was my boy. We played basketball for 20 years, and he would come watch episodes and be like, "The music sucks. The music sucks." I'm like, "What the f- do you know?" And out of nowhere, this guy is bringing music to me. He's got this amazing ear, and he's built this successful career out of this. He's got a podcast with Pharrell now, and so we'll do the same thing. I mean, Scott, we're like I said, you can see the classic rock music that was my inspiration early on in the show, and then it started getting younger and hipper, which was Scott. We will have the cool cutting edge music for sure. And Entourage, we were doing it before most shows were doing it with a limited budget and pulling it off, and getting everybody from Kanye to break a song on the show to Led Zeppelin to give us a song which nobody thought we could get in a million years.
Does that just bump up your bottom
God.
line? Like where you're finishing off the show, you shoot the whole thing. You're shutting down restaurants to shoot. You're shooting on Hollywood. All that crazy shit, all these big mansions you're renting, and then your music budget must be as equal to all of that, because to license all that shit must have been crazy.
It was crazy and difficult, and not just money, which was expensive, but like we had to get Jimmy Page and Robert Plant to sign off on this, and I mean, literally, like a bicycle had to be driven up like an Irish countryside to someone's castle to like hand someone a DVD to get them to sign off on going to California to end Entourage on, and those are the types of things we would do. And then things like Kanye would call us and be like, I want to release this song on the show. Like The Good Life, that was the first time the song was, as far as I know, was ever heard.
Yeah,
so,
cool.
we had some good stuff that happened.
I was going to say, actually, because there have been scenes in shows that have been so pivotal that have launched artists' careers off the back of a song in a show, basically.
For sure. There was a lot of stuff with us. We did a podcast with Scott Venner on ours. We talked about all of the stuff and all the needles that would move on the charts when we would put a song on, and it was pretty cool because people really started realizing how many people were really watching this show by that alone.
Dude, that makes you a market maker.
Cool.
All right,
man.
I mean, listen, we did a lot of that stuff there. We launched it, not intentionally necessarily, but we launched the tequila brand off of the show and, watched it sell for $300 million.
Where's your equity?
A year and a half. Yeah, I got to beat them out of it, beat it out of them. So, but, that's part of the cool things that, we were able to do on that show.